everyone, and welcome back to today's Fireside Chat. I am really excited to be back with you today. Unfortunately, I was not here last week. I had a colleague filling in, but I'm back here today, and it's really amazing to be back and to have with us Kristina Coleman, who is a mental health trauma specialist. We're going to dig deep into her story and her work. And I'm really excited that she's with us. So we want you to go ahead and lift this message up and share this message out. Go ahead and click that share button. Don't be afraid to do it. It's only going to take you a few seconds and you lose nothing. So share this message, amplify this out, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. We want to make sure that communities are given the information needed to be able to get through very difficult things in life. And of course, we want you to subscribe to our channels on YouTube. If you are a YouTuber, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube at iRace Inc. And also go ahead and follow us on all social media platforms at iRace Inc. Also, don't forget to follow me at Shaniqua E. Moore. And don't forget to subscribe to our ATL Rise podcast, which is available for listen at Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and whatever platform you choose to use. All right, let's jump into the conversation. Kristina, again, thank you so much for being with me this afternoon. I
Of
appreciate
course.
you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do want to read your bio for those that don't know you and may not be familiar with your work. And then we'll jump into some questions. Sounds good?
Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. So Kristina is the founder and CEO of youRmore LLC, her private practice, which focuses on mental health and the impact of intergenerational trauma among communities of color. She's also the vice president of child advocacy and mental health programs at Safe Horizon and a member of NASW New York City. Shout out to y'all. She's also a board member of YMC of Rockland, and she has two masters, one in social work leadership from from Hunter College, and in public administration from Mercy College. Did I get that
Correct.
college correct? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And then Christina brings over 14 years of experience in the social service field, specializes in child welfare, family reunification, trauma treatment, mental health, and development. If there's anything I left out, feel free to jump in and add it.
No, I think you got it. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Christina. Well, again, it's so great to have you. Um, there are questions that we have preset, but I think one of the questions burning on my heart is what made you choose social work?
Social work chose me. I didn't choose it. My career path, I was going to be a history teacher. That's what I wanted to do. And I started my first job at Children's Village, which is a large residential foster care agency, as a teacher's assistant. And that was my first exposure to this field. And then I kind of started moving up and getting to know the different aspects of social work. So I would say the social work chose me, but the diversity, the reach, and the scale in which at which level you could do social work is what's keeping me here.
I love that. Can you like talk a little more about that, like the reach and the diversity within social work? 'Cause I think social work is so vast and there's so many layers to it, and even evolving
Mhm.
specialties within this social work profession. But you talked about like that diversity and the levels. Can you speak more to what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when people typically think about social work, it's usually in the capacity of doing home visits or, working for CPS, right? And I think, there's this idea that social work means you're poor, right? That you're not going to make any money, right? It doesn't mean that the field is not underpaid. I mean, that's a whole nother issue. But, being exposed to the idea that social workers can be leaders of organizations, can be CEOs, can be vice presidents, can own their own business, right? Like, I think that's within recent years where people were like, social workers can be entrepreneurs. Like, that is amazing. And what does that look like? And really be well off. So I think it's just so many levels. And if you want to do more of the direct service where you're working for a nonprofit or a for-profit organization where you're doing the home visits, you're doing the client-facing work, you have that, you can do that, right? So I would say, it's at all levels, right? Entrepreneur, business owner, CEO, right? Like it's so many different levels. And I think we haven't always got that credit to say like we can run organizations, right? And if you don't want to do that, you can be your own business owner. So really a lot of different levels in social work.
I love that. And so would you say that your level is direct practice and also entrepreneurship?
Absolutely. I would say I'm like at each almost at each level, to be honest. Because ultimately I think where I am now, although I do have my own business, and that's really about the direct client facing work, right? And having that impact. My goal is to be a CEO and to run a nonprofit organization at that level and be able to make changes on a larger scale. So I would say I'm kind of hitting each level, and it's nice. It's really nice.
I love that. It's amazing. It's one of the things I love most about being a social worker is the
Mhm.
ability to move fluidly through levels and to impact systems on a
Yeah.
multidimensional level. So I love that you're saying that. But I'm eager to learn more about youRmore, partly because it has my last name, but
Yes, correct. That's where I'd instill it.
no, oh my goodness, absolutely not. Great minds think alike, but love to know
Yes.
more about that practice and what you're doing over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So youRmore officially became a business in 2020 during the pandemic. And prior to that, I was doing work that I didn't have a name for, right? So being a nonprofit, being in social services for over 14 years, I started to recognize patterns, right? I started to recognize that brown and black children, brown and black families were being overrepresented in these systems. But one thing that has stuck out to me in particular was when we talked about independent living options for children,
Right.
or young adults, I'll call them that, right? One of the things that I noticed was that the system, child welfare system, was really telling us check the boxes, right? So when you have a youth who's 18, 19, going to be aging out of foster care, there's some check boxes that you need to do, right? And that's apply for Section 8, right? Apply for housing. Um, and I started to notice was how are we sending these children back to the same communities that it didn't work out before, right? I've worked with many kids where they got accepted into an apartment and it was in a community where they had a rival gang, right? Like, how are we
Right.
really saying they're going to be successful? So I started to put language to it and I started to realize that was an intergenerational approach and model, right? Is
Right.
like, we need to look at that person's parent and say, like, where did they live, right? Like,
Yeah.
are we really setting them up to be able to break chains and barriers, or are we putting a band-aid on it? And through
Right.
that, youRmore was formed because I started to realize that although we can look at larger scales and look at some of the intergenerational trauma that's happening for people of color, in particular African Americans,
Mm.
um, that there's also an individual aspect that needs to happen, right? There's a
Mm.
validation that people of color need to say, like, you got the short end of the stick, right? And that doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
cannot set a life for yourself. That doesn't mean that you can't overcome your struggle, but you
Yeah.
do need to be validated and understanding that there are going to be some struggles that are really different for you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how youRmore was born.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
it's been interesting. And just from my own personal development, right? Where here I am with two master's degrees, have access to education, went to a Catholic school, yeah, Maria Regina, shout out to them, and still struggle to get access to information, right?
Wow.
That was something that I had to recognize that that's a systems issue, right?
Yeah.
That's a trauma issue, right?
Yeah.
Where does the information come from? And being able to really challenge myself to say, like, where are the avenues for information, right? That's the biggest part. We need the
Yeah.
information, but there's so many barriers that stop us from getting the information, and a lot of it has to do with that intergenerational trauma that we deal with on a day to day that we didn't cause. That's the
Yeah.
biggest part of it. This was handed down. This is not caused, right? But
Right.
it's not learned, right? It's something that's literally handed down through DNA, practices, culture,
Right.
slavery, right? Which is where it comes from. So
Right.
that's a little bit about how youRmore was developed and born. So
No, that's super inspiring. I love that. Everything you said, it really does resonate with me. The validation piece really stuck out. You think about validation, even in the therapeutic process, it is essential to helping a client through to achieve
Yeah,
breakthroughs
correct.
therapeutically, to help them to feel heard and seen and to work through a lot of the trauma they're dealing with. So when we think about it on a more, I guess, a uh, macro level or a
Mhm.
collective validation, I don't know if that has necessarily happened the way we would want it to. Um,
Yeah,
and then one may ask, well, what would it look like to have a collective validation? I think that's an interesting question that we would need to answer as a Black and Brown community, and not
correct.
allow it to be answered by those that have caused the trauma, which tends to be
Mhm.
the solution a lot of the times. So the validation piece is huge, ensuring that we feel validated.
Right.
We're not treated as you're the reason why this has happened, but this has happened to you, and that's another huge thing about trauma.
Yeah,
Trauma is not something that's wrong with you; it's that something has happened to you.
correct.
And so, as a collective, a lot has happened to Blacks. We're going into Juneteenth in a few days, and it's finally a national holiday, but
Mhm.
how many years did we have to fight to get that? I think it was only
Absolutely.
during the pandemic that it became a national holiday. And so these are things that are still not being validated. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
important to our healing process.
Absolutely, right? One of the things I've learned and being in the field, and this is before we kind of get into the Black trauma, right? The intergenerational trauma is when we think about trauma and how we address it. The first thing we do is to remove the person from the trauma, right? That's the
Right.
first thing, right? We got to get you out of this situation for you to start healing. But how
Right.
do you get African Americans to heal from something that's continuous? It's happening, right? Like Black and Browns are incarcerated at huge rates, right? That's still happening, right? That's a version of slavery.
Yeah.
That's not by coincidence, right? So how do we get you to heal from that? Economics, right? Like how do we have to acknowledge these things, and we have to validate them in order to try to move past them, right? Because
Yeah.
once people get the validation that what happened to you has affected you,
Yeah.
right? Like we can understand that. That's how healing begins, right? Because the reality of it is a lot of things that are happening, whether with the police department, right? The unjust killing of Black men on the street in daylight being videotaped, that may not stop right away, but I
Mhm.
can validate that this is happening and not, create this illusion that it's happening in your mind. No, this is a real thing. And this is part of a system that was designed because this is how the system sees you. Right. So it's that big part of it is like when we think about on the collective scale, there needs to be the voice of Black people that can define what does validation look like, right? And how do we move forward in this?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that defining piece, and I love the idea of Blacks being the ones that bring definition, because I
Yeah.
think for a long time, what's been defined for us has not been our own um, reality, right? Or the
Yeah.
reality of our ancestors. I think I asked this question, and I apologize for the noise in the back. I think I asked this question: if our ancestors were to tell the story, what would they say?
Mhm.
What would their narrative be? Right? Would it be what has been the European um, viewpoint, Eurocentric viewpoint,
Yep.
or would it be something else? And I think that's really interesting question to really think about and ponder. What would they
Yeah.
say?
Absolutely. I think you would get different versions based on which ancestors and what time period you ask, right? So,
Yeah,
when you think about which happens now, right? If you were to ask different Black people who had different experiences, it may look very different, right? And, one of the things that I always tell people when we think about certain other groups, when you think about Black Americans in particular, and I say this because when you think about a Black American coming to America, there's a sense of lost identity, right? And the way we have had to create our own lifestyle and our own identity that American culture actually shuns, right? And being able to find the beauty in it. So I think when, thinking about our ancestors, some of those stories I think would really highlight the beauty and the resiliency of Black people, right? I think some of those other stories might focus on a different aspect, in a sense of how they felt about some of the oppression and the slavery and the stolen land and all of these things that happen. But it would be very interesting to see our ancestors at different levels, different time periods, retell the story.
I love that. And it's really interesting the way you broke that down, different eras may and different perspectives. But definitely, I think the story would be different than what we have heard. Um, there's this idea that I just recently heard from an amazing human, Dr. Ovita Williams. And it was at, I'm not sure if you were present at the NASW New York City conference just about a week ago. It was amazing. She actually had stated this, and I was trying to find my notes and pull this up, but she
Mhm.
asked a question. Do you think the slaves would have felt better if they had therapy 3 times a week? Do you think the slaves would have felt better? Is therapy solving it? Solving the issue? Is it solving the issue? Or are we pacifying it and putting a band aid on it and not
Mhm.
dealing with the transformation of structures and systems, which is where the real work needs to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you first said that, I was shaking my head going, no, right? And I was thinking in the sense of, I just recently did a presentation on how to talk about abuse to families of color. And one of the important parts in that is being able to recognize that some of the parenting styles was not to address trauma and not to necessarily comfort the children, but teach them tough love. Right. So when
Hmm.
I heard that, I was like, absolutely not. Like, we're not going to start therapy in the process of you being a slave. It's just not going to work. Right. But I
Right.
do think that's a and question, right? Like, it
Hmm.
might, and there still
Hmm.
needs to be this validation piece, right? Because I work
Hmm.
with so many Black clients who are trying to heal from the things their parents did, right? And through therapy, we talk about it, but it's really hard to move forward from the, I'm going to say, oppression, just for the sake of this conversation, that their parents have caused, or the trauma that their parents have caused them, because there's no validation. Right. So
Yeah.
if you think about a slave getting therapy 3 times a week without the validation that, what we're doing to you is messed up.
Yeah.
Right. I always think about that famous quote by Harriet Tubman when she's like, I could have freed more slaves if they only knew they were slaves. Right.
Right.
So it's that, those concepts and that history where, I don't know, maybe it might have worked for some and others might have been like, what are we doing here? Right. They may not even known they were slaves. Right. When you're born
Yeah.
into something, it becomes normal. Right. And that's a big part of the work we do at youRmore, is that for forever, since the beginning of slavery and oppression, Blacks have been taught to normalize their experience. And this is what we do now, right? Like when we're watching TV and we're seeing our men of color, women of color being killed in their own homes, right? It hurts, but there's still this normalizing, like, all right, like, what can we do about it? You know what I mean? And that's a big part of it, is like, we have to start healing internally and saying these experiences are not normal. There's nothing normal about this, that we're still struggling this way today.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's almost like a feeling of helplessness or hopelessness. And I
Correct.
think this is why the transformation is individual, but it's also structural. It's
Hmm.
transforming structures. Um, because it's almost like going back to the idea that, okay, we're gonna give you therapy, but you're a slave, but you're gonna get therapy 3 times a week, right? It's almost like a mind bending game because it's like
Correct.
we're gonna give you a solution, but at the same time we're creating this structure of trauma that we're gonna keep you in. And
Absolutely.
but we're gonna do it. So it almost cancels out the therapy, and I think that's the idea. It's if we only do the individual work, but we don't do the transformational structural work,
Correct.
it almost cancels out. And I don't wanna say cancel completely, but it also makes it of how effective is it if we're just doing the therapeutic part and that's it.
Of it. Oh no, absolutely, right. And it does need to happen on a larger scale and the system scale. And people get upset with me, and that's okay, right? I'm very much a person who is not, we need to get rid of the systems. I am very much, we need to transform them, right? They are not working the way they should be working, but they're working the way they were intended to work, right?
Right.
But we need to transform them, because the reality of it is people still do need help, right? So
Yeah.
when we think about getting rid of a system where you can call in when child abuse is happening, for me, that's not okay, right? Because I also know how many kids have, their lives have literally been saved because of it. But we
Right.
do need to transform, not reform, transform the system,
Yeah.
so that they can work the way they should be working, right?
Right.
And then that 3 times a week therapy could be effective,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? And that it's not just one of the challenging parts about the therapy that I do with people of color. And sometimes after we have these amazing conversations, is sending them back into the world,
Yeah.
right? That's the reality of it, right? But we really focus on how to cope with it. And we really focus on how to validate that your experiences, that, your high blood pressure, your stress level, your swollen ankles, that it actually
Yeah.
could be a result of racism before
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
result of you having too much sugar.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's those type of conversations that you'rmore is willing to have, where we're like, we're not going to normalize your and I'm sorry about that. We're not going to normalize your physical symptoms to something you ate only.
Right.
Not saying it doesn't, like, not saying that
Right.
part is not important, but there's
Right.
some other things happening to your body, because we live in a constant state of survival 24 hours a day.
Oh, yeah.
That's not normal.
Absolutely. I love just opening up the conversation
Mhm.
and and that transparency piece and the admitting that this may be due to stress related to racism. It
Yeah,
may not just be your sugar, what you're eating. And the other part may be, it may be related to the stress of racism, of dealing with it on a daily basis, and that and piece, and the fact that you don't have access to healthy food markets
correct.
anywhere in
Correct.
your community, and the fact that you can't afford a car, and the fact that you probably can take a Uber there because you don't have the money, and the fact that maybe the trains don't go to those markets because they're meant to keep certain people in those outside of the communities out. So
Absolutely.
there's so many layers to it, and I think opening the conversation the way
Yep.
you're doing it is so pivotal.
And you said it perfect. It's so many layers to it, right? Like, I love all of the things that you're saying, because that's so true. And then I'll add an additional piece to it, is sometimes just that skill level, right? Like, when you think about culturally Black American food, it's fried, it's fatty, it's delicious,
Oh, yeah.
right? But that's also not by coincidence. That's what slaves were given to eat, and we made
Yeah.
miracles out of it. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah.
Like, when you really think about some of
Mhm.
these components, right? Like, I always tell people, when we think about what trauma is, sometimes it's literally that the person did not intend to cause it, but they had no skills or the support to do something different. Right? That's really, really important. That happens a lot in communities of color when we think about punishment methods, right? Like, sometimes most parents that practice corporal punishment, their intent is not to hurt, their intent is to stop and protect,
Yeah.
right? And we have to be able to acknowledge that sometimes parents don't have the skills to do
Mhm.
something different, right? But
Yeah.
if we're having a conversation and I can acknowledge your efforts to protect your child, you might hear me a little bit different when I say, all right, let's see if we could try something else.
Yeah.
Right, because
And
I'm
I
giving you
wonder,
validation first.
yeah, I love that. And I apologize for jumping in. I
No, you're
also
good.
wonder if it's they lack the skills or they lack the understanding. And what is appropriate punishment? Is it Eurocentric? Is it culturally humble? So I think a lot of what we're talking about, it's almost
Mhm.
like, okay, we're gonna help uh, communities of color overcome
Mhm.
intergenerational trauma, but we're going to do it from a Eurocentric standpoint, and then we're just redoing what we're trying to undo. So I think even rethinking our strategies, are our interventions speaking to the culture, or
Correct.
is it indeed Eurocentric? And I think
Yeah.
really breaking those things, those lines down, was what I've seen in my work over the years. One of the reasons why I left government, is because sometimes we become complicit in the
Oh, yeah.
systemic racism.
Absolutely.
Um, and then we're like, we're trying to help you people. What's wrong with you?
What's
Like,
wrong with you?
you're non-compliant. We're like,
Absolutely.
you're
Yeah.
really not helping. You're
You know,
traumatizing them.
absolutely, and I agree with you 1,000%. And one of the this is to speak to what you were saying. One of the another training that I give to organization is to talk about true engagement. Right? We
Yeah.
all the right now, that's the climate, that's the hype. Engagement, engagement, engagement. And I tell people is like when we think about engagement, by whose definition, right? And
Yeah.
I always give them an example. I remember being a caseworker and I had a Black woman client and we had a moment, okay? She got housing, like we had a moment. And she looks at me and she goes, girl, and I got excited. The Black in me was so excited, right? Because someone calling you girl is like a term of endearment. Like,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
But my social worker background and my educational background was like, no, no, no. Reestablish the boundaries immediately.
Mhm.
How there's no way we can engage. I could engage this person if I didn't stop myself and say, no, it's okay. But I
Yeah.
remember feeling like I was going to get in trouble because this
Mm.
woman was referring to me as girl and not miss.
Mm.
Right. So the training that I teach people is how do we help Black workers or whatever the nationality is
Mm.
to do true and authentic engagement without this fear of getting in trouble. Right? Why
Mhm.
can't I hug my client if
Mhm.
it's appropriate or I'm side what's comfortable for both? Why not?
Mhm.
Why
Oh,
can't
yeah.
I take this food that the client is making me? It doesn't mean I have to eat it, but why would
Mhm.
I risk the damage in the relationship and
Mhm.
saying no
Mhm.
because of what I'm taught in the textbook, right? So that's like the component too, is like when we think about engagement or parenting methods, it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be based in European culture,
Yeah.
right? But there are ways to find a middle ground. Like,
Mhm.
you can't hit them like that,
Mhm.
but let's see what else you're comfortable with, right? Because
Mhm.
we're the expert of our lives. No one else is.
Yeah. I agree. This is so deep. This conversation can go deeper because we can talk about corporal punishment and then police beating and killing our kids. What's the difference?
Right.
We
Right.
can go deeper into the, but also thinking, like you said, based on a textbook, but who wrote the textbooks?
Who wrote the textbook?
Who were they written for? And for whose purpose?
Absolutely.
And so we got to dig deeper beyond the surface to really get some real solutions to these issues. But this is a amazing conversation to be continued because we are coming on time here. But
Ah,
you're
not
absolutely
enough time, I tell you.
amazing. You're doing great work, and you're such a breath of
Thank you.
fresh air. And I'm honored to have met with you for these few minutes and chat with you and picked your brain. And would love to have you back. But how could people reach you and learn more about your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have the website up, which is youRmore.online. And they can reach me via email, which is Coleman, Coleman 0106 at gmail.com, or LinkedIn as well, Kristina Coleman.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. And if people are interested in your services, do you mind just providing a quick overview of what you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people are interested, I offer one-on-one counseling as well as life coaching, which is a big part, as well as consulting. So I do presentations and trainings for organizations as well. If people are interested in and really, really engaging with clients and respecting culture.
Real engagement, y'all. Real
Yeah,
engagement.
real engagement.
Girl. No, I had to throw that in there. I love it. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Christina. We appreciate you, your brilliance, and all that you're doing to move our communities forward. Y'all check out her page. Reach out to her if you're interested in life coaching or therapy. Her email is Coleman 0106 at gmail.com. We hope that you enjoyed this fireside chat. It was quick. But it was also meant to, again, inspire and empower you. And if you got anything from this at all, let us know. Give us a shout out. Comment below if you're watching this later. Don't forget to comment or share. And if there are topics that you want to see take place that we're not talking about, reach out to us, email us, shoot us an email or inbox us, DM us, and let us know. We appreciate all of you for your support, for following us in our content. Don't forget again to subscribe to our channels at iRace Inc. And don't forget to share and uplift this message so that we can continue empowering our communities. It's Juneteenth is coming up in just a few days. So we're gonna rerun this for a few days, and we want y'all to get out and celebrate. And if you don't know what Juneteenth is, I need you to go and Google this and do your research, okay? And celebrate with us. So again, Kristina, we love you so much. We
Oh,
appreciate
thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for being here.
much.